Joan had been widowed for nearly 7 years when Frank walked into her life. They met at a community garden event on a sunny Saturday morning. He offered to help carry a bag of soil to her car, and by the time they reached the parking lot, they were already laughing about how stubborn tomato plants could be. He was 67. She was 64. Neither of them was looking for love, and yet it found them anyway. They started slowly. Coffee turned into lunch, lunch into long walks, and eventually they were holding hands without thinking. Friends noticed. Joan's daughter noticed. "You seem happier, Mom," she said one afternoon. And she was. But when Frank broached the idea of marriage, Joan felt a sudden tightness in her chest. She liked her life. She had her own rhythm, her own home, her own finances. Love was one thing, marriage was another, and she wasn't sure she could or should do it all again. As she lay awake one night, staring at the ceiling, she realized something. Remarrying after 60 isn't the same as it was in her 20s. It came with new truths, new risks, and new rewards. Over the next few months, Joan would learn 5 truths that changed how she thought about saying, "I do" again. 1. Love feels different, but that doesn't make it less real. Frank didn't make Joan's heart race the way her late husband Greg once did, but he made her feel safe. Seen? There was no rush of youthful infatuation, no late-night phone calls or dramatic declarations. Instead, there was calm companionship. He remembered her birthday. He checked the oil in her car. He asked about her grandchildren. At first, she worried it wasn't enough. That maybe what they had was more friendship than love. But then one morning, he brought her a coffee just the way she liked it, half decaf, 2 sugars, extra cream. And he sat beside her on the porch and didn't say a word while she cried about a song that reminded her of Greg. That's when she realized this kind of love might be quieter, but it was deeper. It was built on patience, on shared griefs, on understanding the value of time. And that was enough. Number 2, the baggage is real, but so is the wisdom. Both Joan and Frank had long lives before they met. They'd loved and lost. They'd raised children. They had habits, opinions, and scars. Joan liked her house cool and quiet. Frank liked music playing at all hours. He was spontaneous. She preferred plans. In her first marriage, she might have tried to change him. Now, she didn't bother. She'd learned that no one's perfect, and everyone carries something. They talked openly about their pasts, about fears, regrets, even former spouses. They gave each other space to be whole people, not half of some fantasy. It wasn't always easy. Frank sometimes clashed with Joan's son. Joan occasionally bristled at how Frank managed his money. But, unlike her younger self, she didn't see those things as deal breakers. They were simply part of learning someone new, with eyes wide open. 3. Finances matter more than you think. When Frank brought up a joint bank account, Joan froze. She'd been handling her own money for years and didn't want to risk the savings she'd worked so hard for. Her retirement plan was carefully laid out. She'd seen friends lose their financial footing after a remarriage gone wrong. So she talked to a lawyer. She talked to a financial advisor. And most importantly, she talked to Frank. They decided on a prenuptial agreement, not because they didn't trust each other, but because they wanted clarity. They agreed to keep some assets separate and to split certain shared expenses. It wasn't romantic, but it was responsible. And oddly enough, it brought them closer. Having the conversation openly showed that they were in this for each other, not for money, not for convenience, but for companionship. 4. Family dynamics can be complicated, but navigable. Joan's daughter was polite to Frank but distant. Her son was more vocal. "Mom, are you sure about this? What if he just wants your house?" The comments hurt, but she understood. Her children weren't just being rude. They were protective. They'd seen what happened when other older relatives remarried and the fallout that followed. Frank's family had their own reservations. His daughter feared Joan would become more important in his life than the grandkids. Joan and Frank didn't push anyone. Instead, they invited the families to dinner. They listened. They kept showing up with kindness and consistency. And over time, things softened. Not everyone became best friends, but there was mutual respect. Joan realized that blending families at this age wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about adding to the circle, to the love, to the story. 5. Your definition of marriage might change. When Joan was 23, marriage meant forever. Children, careers, building a home. At 64, it meant something else. It meant choosing someone to share the day to day with. It meant doctor's appointments, joint vacations, and the occasional argument about what to watch on TV. They decided not to live together full time. Not at first. They kept their separate homes, visiting each other on weekends, spending holidays together, and maintaining the freedom they had grown used to. Some people didn't understand. Why bother getting married if you're not going to live together all the time? But for Joan and Frank, it worked. Their version of marriage wasn't traditional. It was tailored, shaped by experience, respect, and realism. When they finally stood in front of a small group of friends and family to exchange vows, Joan felt no nerves, no butterflies, just a quiet certainty. She wasn't saying "I do" to a new life. She was saying it to the continuation of the good life she already had, now made better with someone to share it. A few months after the wedding, Joan was weeding the garden when her daughter dropped by with a cup of iced tea. They sat on the porch and watched Frank wrestle with a stubborn hose. "I didn't get it at first," her daughter said. "I was scared you were rushing into something." Joan smiled. "I wasn't rushing. I was listening. To myself, mostly." And that was the biggest truth of all, one she hadn't expected. That at this age, love wasn't about filling a hole or completing a puzzle. It was about choosing joy again, about saying yes to the future without forgetting the past. Joan never thought she'd wear another wedding ring, but every time it caught the sun while she gardened or cooked or held Frank's hand, she felt grateful, not for finding love again, but for having the courage to recognize it when it came. Not every story ends with a second wedding. Some find companionship in different forms. But for those considering remarriage after 60, Joan would offer this: be honest, be brave, ask the hard questions. But don't turn away from love just because you've lived a lot already. Sometimes the best chapters come after the middle of the book.